Yeah, good question. And I know if I had selected this video to watch, I'd be asking the same thing. So how fast is this? So I want to establish that really early on in the video. So what I've done is I've set up a log and I'm going to film it now in real time. There's not going to be any speeded up video. It's all done in one take in real time, and I'm going to start the timer with this first cut. Now, as you'll see there, just over here, I'm using once used, reclaimed logs, and these are hewn logs, so the two sides are taken off to make straight inside and outside on the wall. And because they're once used, they already have the lateral groove along the bottom, which does make this easier and faster. But this system will work with all different kinds of logs, and I'm going to show you how to do it with these logs, with used and reclaimed round logs, with just round logs that have never been used before as well. It all works. In fact, the only limitation with this technique or system is that it all relies on the length of the chainsaw bar. Your logs cannot be longer than the chainsaw bar, or wider than the chainsaw bar is long. One thing to note is that for this to work, we're talking about short corners on this building. Because of the limitations with the length of the chainsaw bar, you cannot have long corners and still do this. But I'll explain and show that later on once I've established how fast the system is. So who's this for? Who would use this kind of building style? Maybe you're just building an outbuilding and want to do it quick, or maybe you've got your place in the countryside, a bug out location, somewhere where you can retreat to in case of emergency. And now, watching the news, it looks like Armageddon is just next Tuesday, so you're in a bit of a hurry. What I've done is I've changed the equation. When you're considering log building or a style to build a building in, a method, then all the different things, there's lots of different considerations. There's the aesthetics, what it's going to look like. With log building, there's what kind of corners are going to be, long corners, short corners, saddle joints, dovetail joints, whatever. And also the time that it's going to take. I just made a mistake there. I shouldn't have turned the log just yet. To do this properly, I only need to move the log once, but no big deal. Now, what I did was I took all the considerations and got rid of everything except time, and decided to see how fast it's possible to do it if you get rid of everything else. Just go for speed. And that alters the equation. It makes, possibly for some people in certain situations, might make log building that more appealing because it can be done quite fast. And obviously I'm showing you just one log, but then building a log building is just a repetition of this. You put a log in place, you get it put down, sunk in place, locked in position, and then you do it again and again and again, and you've got a building. In my case here, I had all these logs that were left over from other projects. They're not all the same type of log, they're not all the same size, and they're not great quality. They're okay, but they're not great. I couldn't use them for a project that I was doing for a customer, for instance. But they seemed a little bit too good to just chop up for firewood, so I started this building. And I've been using it as a kind of log building laboratory, where I can try different techniques and methods and different kinds of joints. I've done some double lateral grooves on these. They don't really work on logs of this size. It's only good for big logs. But I wanted to make use of these logs, so I started my little log building laboratory. There's no foundation on this. There are 4 rocks that I put it on, which are not, so the building is not actually even square. And I'm now going to go ahead and finish this building and make an outdoor sauna, in fact. And one of the reasons that I decided to go ahead and do this is that because I've found that I can do this faster, you wouldn't normally want to invest the time in a building with substandard materials, which maybe the building's only going to last for 10 years. But if you can do it faster, then, well, why not? So obviously I've had to get rid of some stuff in order to concentrate on the speed here. So if you just look at how you normally go around with log building, as you can see over there, you first have to lift the log into place, and obviously we still have to do that. But then you have to monitor the height of both ends of the log and try and get things leveled up. You might drop one end down or lift the other end up. In this case, both. That's there. Lifting one end, dropping the other end. Now what you then have to do is obviously draw the log, and we got rid of that. There's not going to be any drawing, not using a log scriber at all. But then you have to lift the log off of the building generally and take it somewhere else, even if it's just to the side, get it at a good working height, and then you do your log carving. And now there usually is a sweet spot on every building when the wall is just coming up to a good height. It's a nice working height, and you can do a round of logs, maybe two, like that, just resting it on the actual building. But that sweet spot doesn't last for very long. So what I did just before I started filming that video was that I put in a couple of rounds with really long ends. Now I said you only do short corners on using this method, and that's true, but I put in a couple of long corners so that once I get to a certain height I can put planks across those sticking out corner pieces and use that as a kind of a scaffold to stand on, so that I can carry on working and have things at a decent height, because all of these logs are going to be carved in place on the walls. So I said that we're not going to be drawing these logs. No log scriber is going to be getting used, and the drawing of the logs is quite a time-consuming part of the process, and there's a reason for that. You need to draw the logs if you want really crisp, tight-fitting joints. So obviously we're going to compromise here. And by the way, that's 7 minutes. That's that log now done and in place. But just how rough are the joints going to be? Let's take a look.
So they're rough, but they're not that rough. You can see a little bit of light coming through just there. This joint here looks a little bad, but a little bit of persuasion gets it into place. So they're not perfect. But first thing to say is, of course, 7 minutes. And then no log scriber required. No spirit level required. And no tape measure required. Or actually, I did use a tape measure just to check the lengths of the logs before I put them on the walls, to make sure so I can select the right log for each wall. But of course, normally I'd be using a tape measure constantly to monitor the height of the corners. Now I like perfect, nice, tight, clean lines on log joints just as much as the next person's. But if you're thinking, no, they've got logs, these joints are going to have to be perfect, this is a deal breaker, then consider a couple of things. Now an uninsulated air gap is just that, it's an uninsulated air gap. But that's fine for an outbuilding, if you're building a shed to dry wood or whatever. But in a building where you want some kind of insulation value, you're going to have to put some kind of insulation between the logs, and that's going to fill up those cracks. Now, as I said, this building is going to be a sauna, so I am obviously going to be insulating, and that means putting insulation between these logs. Now, I'm using, for the insulation, moss.
Yes, moss. Don't let anyone tell you that this isn't good insulation. It's the best. It wicks out the moisture from between the logs. It's especially important in this case because these logs have been stored outside, so they're quite wet. And the pH of moss actually kills mold. But let me show you where I get my moss from. So I'm kind of lucky in this regard, in that I've got a little bit of forest where there is this just the right kind of moss that we use for the insulation. It's ground cover moss, and this is what you're looking for. Goes in wet like this, dries out nicely, sucks the moisture out of the wood. Like I said, pH kills mold and inhibits new mold growth. And it's free. So the first thing to note, of course, is that those joints that we're looking at, they're all going to be filled up with insulation. And here's that log, that 7-minute log that I just did, and a before and after shot, with and without, or without and with the insulation in place. But another thing to take into account is that most of us don't live in a perfect world where we've got the time, the resources and the space to store logs to dry for a couple of years before we use them. For example, those aspen logs that I used in the project last year, they had been stored for a couple of years, drying, but they were drying outside, so they still contained moisture. And I put that building together inside in a heated workshop before taking it down again so that I could move it to the build site. Now, the building was only inside there for maximum a couple of weeks. Now I'll put a link to that project on the screen somewhere just now, but as I was taking the logs down, even though they'd only been there for a couple of weeks, there was mould in between the joints. Those tight seams and tightly locking corners trap air in between the logs where the air can't circulate to keep that mould from growing. Now, if you've seen that log building project, you'll know that once on site I treated everything, including inside all the joints and lateral joints, with pine tar, so it didn't matter in this case. But the point I'm trying to make is that those really tight fitting joints might not be the best thing in terms of the health of the building. So the reason I spent a lot of time on showing that those joints don't need to be so beautiful, so exact, is that understanding the tolerances of that frees us up to experiment quite a lot and makes it possible to log build this way. Now, what we've also done is got rid of that time-consuming phase of drawing and the actual chainsaw carving being really exact. We've got rid of all that, and we've got rid of the log scriber, which a decent, good quality log scriber is an expensive item. So we've maybe lowered the bar in terms of the equipment that you need to get before you can start log building. But I'm adding one thing. Basically, all we need is a chainsaw and these. These are spacers that I made, which are based on the width of a chainsaw cut. And that cut, how wide that cut is going to be, is going to depend on your chainsaw, your bar, and your chain. And we're talking about the cut, not the bar itself. There's no point measuring the chainsaw bar and then making spacers that size. Because the actual cut that the chainsaw bar makes is always a little bit bigger than the bar, obviously. So make a cut in a piece of wood, check what the actual real size of that cut is, and then make spacers. And the spacers I started off just using wedges, and they worked up to a point, but it wasn't very good. These are the third spacers I've made, and these are working good. So we're down to a chainsaw and some spacers, just cheap pieces of plywood of the right thickness, and I've just, with a knife, just taken off the corners on one end, as you see, make them easy to go in. So I'll show you where we use those. So let's talk about the basic principles. I've set a log up here, and it's a fairly normal kind of situation, a standard log joint. Now, I've said that I'm not measuring anything, but all I do is take a look at that gap, and that's the only measurement that's going to matter through this whole process. That gap. That's what I'd say about 9 centimeters. As I said, not measuring, but about 9 centimeters. Now that's the amount that I've got to take out of these logs. And I can take it out anywhere I want, a bit off of each log. We've got more wood on this one than we have on this one, so we'll get it as high as we can. We want to eliminate this shape and turn it into a straight line of some kind. So we will go from this corner up to there. Now, normally I just do everything by eye, but let's just say, I hope that you can see that on the video. That's about where I'm going to go to. And obviously, I'm going to go up to there. So, you could cut this in a straight line, and then you cut that in a straight line, and those logs will go together fine. But if you're cutting a line, I think it's nice to do it at an angle. And we do it down at an angle. Doesn't matter the angle. You can try and do all your angles the same to make the wall look nice, but it doesn't really matter. So I am going to cut on that line out of this log. Now, I mentioned that I thought that I could work the system out so that you didn't have to move the log at all, and I think I've done that. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. I'll go ahead and cut that line. That's the first line to cut. So, cut number 1. Now, all you're going to do is take that measurement, the 9 centimeters or thereabouts, not sure exactly what it is, and we're going to take that point on here, and we're going to take the 9 centimeters on there. So, you can use the first cut as a model, get the angle. So, we're going there. We're going to take it onto there. Now, I think that the best way to do this is actually to imagine this line in here, and for instance on this way, if the line is there, I'm going to cut on the outside of that line. So we're going 9 centimeters plus 1 blade width. And now you can see why this system only works with short corners. If this log was longer, I wouldn't be able to get the saw in here to do this cut. So at this stage you're probably thinking that, okay, all we need to do now is cut off here and across here on the bottom log, but it's not actually quite as simple as that, because that's how I started off doing it, and it works, but it's a bit awkward. But I found that there's a way to make it even better. Now what you could do is to do these 2 cuts and then do the same thing on the other end, but I've figured out that when using the spacers, it doesn't matter too much.
No, that was a mistake. I'm wrong. It does matter. It matters a lot. It's important the order that you do these cuts in, and you absolutely should do the 2 more horizontal cuts at both ends before moving on to the vertical cuts.
That's not bad at all. In fact, I'd be happy with that joint even if I'd gone to the bother of drawing it. But it'd be nice to just leave it like that. We're not going to. We're going to put a spacer in for now until we get the lateral groove cut.
So I'm approaching 20 minutes on this video, and my video editing program keeps deleting things, so I want to get this saved and uploaded. I've got more material. I'm still working on the project, even though, as you've seen, what winter has happened. But I will get the next part loaded up as soon as possible if you want to be notified of when that arrives, then you know what to do. All the subscribing and bells and all that kind of stuff. Of course, it's unfortunate to leave the video at this stage without covering everything, but I thought it was important to lay the groundwork and the background of what it is I'm doing. But it also means that you can leave me some comments and questions. I'm sure that I'm not explaining the thing very well at the moment, so if I've missed something, if I haven't explained something well enough, then leave me a comment, and as I'm putting the next video together, which I've already started, then I will try and address those and make sure that we're really getting a proper picture of how this thing works. Okay, see you soon.